The silk rope tightens around your neck as palace guards drag you toward the burial chamber. You are 15 years old, and your only crime was loving an emperor who just died. Your screams echo through marble corridors as you realize that your gilded prison is about to become your tomb. This was the reality for thousands of young women who entered the Chinese Imperial Harem, believing they were chosen for honor and luxury. Instead, they discovered a world where beauty was a death sentence, where survival required mastering their art of invisibility, and where a single glance could trigger a massacre. What you're about to discover comes from documented historical records that reveal how the Chinese Imperial Harem operated as the most sophisticated system of female oppression in human history. These weren't isolated incidents or exaggerated tales from enemy propagandists. These were calculated methods of control that turned young girls into political pawns, sexual commodities, and ultimately, sacrificial offerings to imperial power. For over 2,000 years, Chinese emperors perfected techniques of psychological manipulation that would make modern torture specialists envious. From the moment a girl entered the Forbidden City, usually between ages 13 and 16, every aspect of her existence was designed to break her spirit while maintaining her usefulness. The evidence comes from palace records, survivor accounts, and archaeological findings that paint a picture so disturbing that many historians initially dismissed it as impossible. You're about to enter a world where speaking without permission could result in death, where pregnancy might save your life or guarantee your execution, and where the greatest honor a woman could achieve was being selected to die alongside her emperor. The Imperial Harem wasn't just a collection of the emperor's women. It was a carefully engineered machine designed to produce heirs, eliminate threats, and demonstrate absolute power through the systematic destruction of human dignity. The selection process began before you even knew you were being watched. Every 3 years, imperial agents would sweep through the empire, conducting what they called the Xiu selection. This wasn't a voluntary process. Every unmarried girl between 14 and 16 was required to present herself for inspection unless she was already married or could provide medical certification of physical disability. Families who tried to hide their daughters faced execution. On the appointed day, you would be brought to the Shenwu gate of the Forbidden City, accompanied by your parents and local officials who had no choice but to deliver you to imperial inspectors. The examination was deliberately humiliating and thorough. Palace physicians would inspect your body for skin infections, unwanted body hair, and body odor. They would examine your teeth, your fingernails, and your posture. You were livestock being evaluated for breeding potential. But the physical inspection was just the beginning. Imperial evaluators would test your ability to read, write, and perform basic arithmetic. They would observe how you walked, how you spoke, and how you responded to commands. Your family background would be investigated going back 3 generations. Any hint of political disloyalty, criminal activity, or social undesirability would result in immediate disqualification and often punishment for your entire family. If you passed the initial screening, you would be taken to specialized quarters within the Forbidden City for advanced evaluation. Here, you would spend weeks learning palace etiquette, proper speech patterns, and acceptable behavior. You would be taught how to walk without making sound, how to lower your eyes in the presence of authority, and how to suppress any emotional response that might be interpreted as defiance. The training was designed to identify girls who could be molded into perfect instruments of imperial pleasure, while weeding out those who showed signs of independent thinking. Instructors would deliberately provoke you, testing whether you would react with anger, fear, or resistance. Any emotional outburst would result in immediate dismissal and often brutal punishment to serve as an example to the remaining candidates. During this training period, you would discover that your previous life had officially ended. All contact with your family was severed permanently. You could not send or receive letters. You could not request visits. Your parents were told that you now belonged to the emperor, and that attempting to contact you would be considered treason. For most girls, the training period was the last time they would ever see sunlight from outside the palace walls. The few who survived the selection process would then be assigned to one of 8 rigid, hierarchical levels that would determine every aspect of their existence for the rest of their lives. At the apex sat the empress, followed by the imperial noble consort, then imperial consorts, imperial concubines, noble ladies, first-class attendants, and finally second-class attendants. Your position in this hierarchy determined what you could eat, what colours you could wear, where you could live, who you could speak to, and whether you would ever see the emperor at all. The higher-ranking consorts enjoyed relative luxury within their prison. An imperial noble consort might have her own residence with 6 to 8 personal attendants. She could eat meals prepared by specialized chefs and wear silk robes decorated with specific patterns that indicated her status. But this luxury came at a price that few understood until it was too late. Lower-ranking women lived in communal quarters with dozens of others, sleeping on simple mats and eating basic rice porridge. They were forbidden from speaking unless directly addressed by someone of higher rank. They could not wear jewellery, use cosmetics, or decorate their living spaces. Their days were filled with menial labour designed to keep them occupied, while they waited for the possibility of imperial attention that would likely never come. The hierarchy wasn't just about comfort or status symbols. It was a psychological weapon designed to create constant competition and prevent the formation of alliances that might threaten imperial control. Women were encouraged to spy on each other, to report infractions, and to compete ruthlessly for any opportunity to advance their position. Friendships were dangerous because they could be interpreted as political conspiracies. Your daily routine was designed to reinforce your powerlessness while maintaining your readiness for imperial use. You would wake before dawn and participate in mandatory exercises designed to maintain physical fitness. You would study classical literature, practice calligraphy, and learn musical instruments, not for personal enrichment, but to make yourself more entertaining to the emperor, should you ever be summoned. Meals were eaten in silence, at assigned times, with portions determined by your rank. Medical care was severely restricted. Palace physicians were forbidden from examining female patients directly. Instead, you would describe your symptoms to a eunuch intermediary who would relay the information to a doctor who would prescribe treatment without ever seeing you. This system meant that serious illnesses often went untreated, and many women died from conditions that could have been easily cured with proper medical attention. The most psychologically devastating aspect of harem life was the waiting. Most concubines would spend their entire lives hoping for a single night with the emperor that would never come. With thousands of women competing for the attention of one man, the mathematical reality was that the vast majority would live and die as virgins, growing old in imperial custody without ever fulfilling the purpose for which they had been selected. This waiting created a unique form of psychological torture. You couldn't plan for the future because your future depended entirely on imperial whim. You couldn't form meaningful relationships because everyone around you was a potential rival. You couldn't pursue personal interests because your time belonged to the emperor even when he wasn't using it. You existed in a state of perpetual readiness for a moment that would likely never arrive. The few women who did catch imperial attention discovered that success in the harem was often more dangerous than obscurity. Pregnancy could elevate your status dramatically, but it also made you a target for other consorts who saw your child as a threat to their own advancement. Palace records document numerous cases of pregnant concubines being poisoned, pushed downstairs, or subjected to other forms of violence designed to cause miscarriage. Even successful pregnancy offered no guarantee of safety. If you bore a daughter, your value would diminish significantly. If you bore a son, you would become embroiled in succession politics that could result in your execution if you chose the wrong side. The empress and higher-ranking consorts would view your child as a potential threat to their own children's inheritance rights, making you a permanent target for elimination. The moment you showed signs of aging, you became expendable. Palace records reveal that concubines who reached their late 20s without producing heirs were quietly transferred to what officials euphemistically called the Cold Palace. This wasn't a different building. It was a psychological death sentence disguised as relocation. Women sent to the Cold Palace were stripped of their already minimal privileges and forced to perform the most degrading labour in the imperial complex. They would spend their days cleaning latrines, scrubbing floors, and preparing corpses for burial. Their food rations were reduced to subsistence levels, and their clothing was replaced with rough hemp garments that marked them as failures in the imperial system. But the Cold Palace served a darker purpose than simple punishment. It was a visible reminder to the remaining concubines of what awaited those who failed to please the emperor. Every woman in the harem knew that her beauty was temporary and that her value would inevitably decline. The sight of former consorts reduced to servants created a constant atmosphere of terror that kept the younger women compliant and desperate to succeed. The psychological manipulation extended beyond mere threats. Palace officials developed sophisticated techniques for breaking the spirits of women who showed signs of resistance or independent thinking. Solitary confinement was common, with defiant concubines locked in windowless cells for weeks or months. During these periods, they would be fed minimal rations and denied human contact, except for brief interrogations designed to extract confessions of disloyalty. Sleep deprivation was another favoured method of control. Women suspected of plotting against the emperor or higher-ranking consorts would be awakened at random intervals throughout the night for questioning. This practice would continue for weeks until the victim became so exhausted that she would confess to anything just to be allowed to rest. These forced confessions would then be used to justify execution or transfer to the Cold Palace. The eunuch system created an additional layer of surveillance and control that made escape or resistance nearly impossible. These castrated men served as intermediaries between the emperor and his concubines, but they also functioned as an elaborate spy network that monitored every conversation, every gesture, and every expression. Eunuchs competed for imperial favour by reporting on the women under their supervision, creating a system where privacy was impossible and paranoia was justified. Some eunuchs developed sadistic relationships with the concubines under their control. Palace records describe cases where eunuchs would demand sexual favours from desperate women, threatening to report fabricated infractions if their demands were refused. The irony was devastating. Women who had been selected for their purity and beauty were forced to submit to castrated men who held the power to destroy their lives with a single false report. The medical restrictions imposed on concubines created conditions that would shock modern healthcare professionals. When women became ill, they were forbidden from describing their symptoms directly to physicians. Instead, they had to communicate through eunuch interpreters, who often lacked medical knowledge and sometimes deliberately misrepresented symptoms to curry favour with palace officials. Pregnancy complications were particularly dangerous because of these medical restrictions. Women experiencing difficult labour were often left to suffer or die, rather than allow male physicians direct access to examine them. Palace records document numerous cases of women bleeding to death during childbirth because proper medical intervention would have required breaking protocols about male access to imperial women. The restriction on medical care extended to mental health issues as well. Women showing signs of depression, anxiety, or psychological breakdown were often diagnosed as possessed by evil spirits. Treatment consisted of exorcism rituals performed by palace priests who had no understanding of mental illness. Many women who could have been helped with proper care instead deteriorated into complete madness, spending their final years chained in basement cells where their screams wouldn't disturb the emperor's peace. Birth control was both forbidden and secretly practiced throughout the harem. Women who became pregnant by the emperor were expected to carry the child to term, regardless of health risks or personal desires. But women who became pregnant by other means faced execution for adultery. This created a dangerous situation where some concubines would seek illegal abortions to avoid being discovered in compromising situations. The methods used for secret abortions were primitive and often fatal. Women would consume mercury, lead powder, or toxic herbs in desperate attempts to terminate unwanted pregnancies. Others would throw themselves downstairs or engage in violent physical activity, hoping to induce miscarriage. Palace records suggest that more women died from botched abortions than from complications of approved pregnancies. The political implications of pregnancy created additional dangers for expectant concubines. Women carrying potential heirs became pawns in complex succession schemes that involved not just other concubines, but also court officials, military commanders, and regional governors. A pregnant concubine might find herself at the center of a conspiracy she never knew existed, with her unborn child's potential claim to the throne making her a target for elimination. The empress and higher-ranking consorts maintained their positions through systematic elimination of threats. Poisoning was the most common method, with victims receiving doses of mercury, arsenic, or exotic toxins that would cause slow, agonizing deaths that appeared to be natural illnesses. Palace kitchens became battlegrounds, where cooks loyal to different factions would compete to deliver fatal meals to their enemies, while protecting their allies. Some empresses developed elaborate networks of assassins recruited from among the eunuchs and lower-ranking concubines. These operatives would receive rewards for successfully eliminating threats, creating a system where murder became a path to advancement. Women who showed too much intelligence, beauty, or imperial favor would mysteriously develop fatal illnesses or suffer accidents that removed them from competition. The most successful concubines learned to navigate this deadly environment by becoming skilled politicians themselves. They would form alliances with powerful eunuchs, bribe kitchen staff to ensure their food wasn't poisoned, and develop networks of informants who could warn them of plots against their lives. Survival required becoming the very thing the system was designed to prevent, an independent woman capable of wielding power. But even the most successful concubines lived under the constant threat of imperial displeasure. The emperor's mood could change without warning, and women who had enjoyed years of favor could find themselves condemned to death over minor infractions or imagined slights. Palace records document cases where concubines were executed for wearing the wrong color clothing, speaking too loudly, or simply being present when the emperor received bad news. The arbitrary nature of imperial justice created an atmosphere where rational planning was impossible. Women who followed all the rules perfectly could still face execution if the emperor decided they represented a threat to his authority. This unpredictability was intentional, designed to keep the entire harem population in a state of constant fear that prevented organized resistance. The most horrific fate awaited those who survived their emperor's death. The moment the Son of Heaven drew his final breath, every woman in his harem faced a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. You could volunteer for burial sacrifice, ensuring your family's honor and financial security, or you could live as a marked woman, forever tainted by association with a dead ruler, never permitted to remarry or bear children. The preparation for this final decision began the moment you entered the Forbidden City, with palace officials constantly reminding you that your ultimate purpose was to serve your emperor in death as you had in life. The burial ceremonies were elaborate productions designed to demonstrate imperial power through mass human sacrifice. During the Ming dynasty, hundreds of concubines would be led to specially constructed chambers beneath the imperial tomb. Some were given poison that promised a peaceful death. Others faced silk cords that would slowly strangle them, while priests chanted prayers for their successful journey to the afterlife. The most terrifying accounts describe women being buried alive in standing positions, arranged around the emperor's corpse, like living furniture waiting to serve him in eternity. Archaeological evidence from Ming tombs confirms these horrific practices, with remains of young women found in positions suggesting they were conscious when entombed. Emperor Yonggle's funeral in 1424 provides the most documented example of this systematic murder. 16 concubines were selected for burial sacrifice, with palace records describing their final meal, their farewell letters to families they would never see again, and their public execution in the halls of the Forbidden City. These women ranged in age from 15 to 23, their lives cut short to satisfy imperial ego. The psychological preparation for death began years before any emperor showed signs of illness. Concubines were required to write suicide letters, compose poetry about their devotion to death, and participate in mock burial ceremonies designed to familiarize them with their expected fate. This constant rehearsal for death created a unique form of psychological torture where women lived their entire adult lives preparing to die. Even when the practice of burial sacrifice was officially abolished during later dynasties, concubines continued to face mass execution upon imperial death. New emperors viewed their predecessors' women as security threats who possessed intimate knowledge of palace secrets and previous political arrangements. The safest solution was systematic elimination, disguised as suicide epidemics or mysterious illnesses that claimed dozens of lives within weeks of imperial transition. The few women who survived these purges faced exile to remote Buddhist monasteries, where they would spend their remaining years in forced religious service. These survivors were forbidden from speaking about their experiences, with monastery rules requiring complete silence about their previous lives. They became living ghosts, their identities erased, their memories suppressed, their existence acknowledged only in carefully sanitized official records. Consort Zhen's tragic end perfectly encapsulates the ultimate powerlessness of even the most favored imperial women. Despite being beloved by Emperor Guangxu and supporting his reform efforts, she was imprisoned by Empress Dowager Cixi when political winds shifted. During the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, as foreign armies approached Beijing, Cixi ordered Consort Zhen's execution to prevent her from potentially collaborating with invaders. The 24-year-old woman was dragged to a palace well and thrown down alive, her screams echoing from the depths until water and stone silenced them forever. Her crime was existing as a reminder of imperial vulnerability and political failure. Her death served as a final demonstration that even imperial love offered no protection against the machinery of absolute power. The Chinese Imperial Harem represents the ultimate evolution of systematic female oppression, a 1,000-year experiment in breaking human spirits while maintaining the appearance of honor and luxury. These weren't isolated incidents of cruelty, but calculated methods of control that reduced thousands of young women to expendable resources in the service of imperial ego. The women who entered those gilded gates believing they were chosen for privilege instead discovered a world where beauty became a death sentence, where survival required the complete surrender of identity, and where the greatest honor was dying for a man who viewed them as interchangeable objects. Their voices were silenced, their stories suppressed, but the archaeological evidence and surviving records ensure that their nightmare will never be forgotten. The Forbidden City still stands today, its red walls and golden roofs attracting millions of tourists who marvel at imperial grandeur. But beneath that beauty lies the truth of what absolute power costs when human beings become commodities in the pursuit of divine authority. The Chinese Imperial Harem wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was a warning about what happens when power becomes so concentrated that entire populations can be sacrificed for the comfort of a single man.